Hey guys, I'm Redeem Zoomer, and today I want to show you guys some very interesting data that was released by Ryan Burge, who does a lot of studies on denominations and political affiliations. It shows just how striking the contrast is in the mainline Protestant denominations between the beliefs of the leadership and the beliefs of the members. So these are the mainline Protestant denominations, the ones like the PCUSA, the Episcopal Church, and the United Methodist Church. They've been stereotyped as the liberal denominations because most of the media headlines about them and most of their social media show insane displays of liberalism, like same-sex weddings, sometimes drag shows in church, pastors praising abortion, egregious things, egregious things. What this data shows, however, is that this does not reflect the majority of these denominations. This does not reflect the majority of the members of these denominations. Now, I would say this doesn't even accurately reflect the clergy because it's only the top 2% of liberals in any of these denominations that make any social media headlines. But even so, they have a cultural reputation, especially online, as the liberal denominations you gotta stay away from if you're a conservative Bible-believing Christian. Now, I am a mainline Protestant. I'm in one of these denominations. This one, the Presbyterian Church USA. Now, I'm not theologically liberal. I am socially and theologically conservative. And everyone has looked at me for years like I'm crazy, like I'm an alien, like I'm a black sheep for being a conservative in a mainline Protestant denomination. And for a long time, I've told people, no, trust me, bro, there's a conservative minority in these churches. And for years, people didn't believe me. Apparently, not only is there a conservative minority, there's a conservative majority, because the laity are, of course, the vast majority of the people in these denominations. And in many of the mainline Protestant denominations, especially mine, it seems like the PCUSA is the most conservative at all of them. In many of these mainline Protestant denominations, the majority is conservative. Now, I know that Democrat doesn't equal theologically liberal and Republican doesn't equal theologically conservative. I'm aware that, being a Democrat doesn't mean you have bad theology, and being a Republican doesn't mean you have good theology. There are many Republicans who are theologically liberal who are just Republican for economic reasons, and there are many people who vote Democrat for economic reasons but are socially and theologically conservative. I get that. But it does show how striking the disparity between the leadership of these denominations and the actual members of these denominations are. I think it is safe to say that the PCUSA is much more conservative than its leadership. I think it's safe to say the United Methodist Church is much more conservative than its leadership. Now, you might say, well, who cares if the laity are conservative? The laity don't make the decisions, the clergy do. Well, here's the thing. There's an increasing clergy shortage in all these denominations. There's a severe pastor shortage in my denomination, so much so that the majority of churches within like 10 years in my denomination will be pastorless. As a result, lay involvement in these denominations is higher than ever, and lay people have more a voice than ever before in these denominations. Like, there are so many testimonies I know from people in the Reconquista movement, which I'll talk about soon. There's so many testimonies I know. It's like if you show up to a random mainline random mainline Protestant church, like your average old United Methodist or PCUSA church, chances are it's going to be run by a bunch of old people, and the second you show up, they're going to hand you a bunch of leadership positions because they're just so desperate for leadership in these denominations. The leadership is very hollowed out. It is ripe for reform. There's never been an easier denomination to reform than these mainline Protestant denominations. I think it's a bit easier in churches with more low church polity, like the PCUSA or the United Church of Christ, where the authority structure is a bit less top heavy. But even so. Now, I kind of have known about this for a while. For a long time, I did know that the PCUSA laity was much more conservative than the clergy. I didn't know how much until now. What I did know in the past, based on some other studies, is that PCUSA laity, not just Presbyterian laity, PCUSA laity are more conservative on average than Roman Catholic laity. Like online, you'll find most Catholics are like base Crusader 69, or even if there are some of the more mainstream, moderate Catholic Inc. people, they'll still be very conservative. That doesn't reflect the beliefs of most Catholics on the ground in real life in America. Like when Pope Leo does those liberal things like praying with other religions, building a Muslim prayer room in the Vatican, having like pagan twerking dances in the Vatican, and having Hindus raise a big Hindu symbol in the Vatican, online, Catholics all hate that. In real life, on the ground, most Catholics actually like that. People forget that for most of American history, uh, Catholics formed a political coalition with socialists and people supporting a lot of progressive sexual revolution ideologies. Catholics have historically been a lot more liberal than Protestants in the history of American politics. And I think Ryan Burge is doing a good job showing this. So the internet is not real life. I care about the internet because I'm an internet guy, but the internet is not real life. On the ground, Protestants are more conservative than Catholics in America. That's just a reality. I don't care what Base Crusader 69 on Twitter says. And yeah, I know Republican doesn't equal conservative, but we can't pretend there is no correlation here. What I'm surprised by, the American Baptist Church is probably the most conservative in terms of clergy as far as the main lines go, but it's actually quite a bit less conservative than the PCUSA in terms of laity. So that was one thing I was legitimately surprised by. Another thing I know is that the PCUSA is only like a few points less conservative than the PCA, which is the conservative schismatic offshoot from us. The PCA is something like 58% Republican compared to the PCUSA's 53% Republican. And just from experience, I know that, like, I've been involved in many PCUSA and PCA churches, and the general vibe of the PCA churches tends to be a little more conservative, but honestly not much. Like, my parents were never members of a PCA church, but, you know, back before I was a Christian, when I was a non-believer, my dad converted and got baptized in a PCA church. And my parents never became members. They were, you know, they totally could have become members, and they were very involved in the community. At that time, my parents were very liberal. There are a lot of liberals that are just involved in PCA churches, and they're just cool with it. So the clergy of the PCA is very conservative. The clergy of the PCUSA is very liberal. On the ground, in terms of the laity, it's kind of the same. Another thing is, I think it is inevitable that these denominations are going to get even more conservative, because I remember 30 years ago, a good majority of all these denominations were liberal in terms of laity and clergy. Now, because the clergy is mostly older, the clergy is going to lag behind the trends of the laity. But here's why I think we're going to keep seeing this trend, why the laity and eventually the clergy of these denominations is going to keep getting more conservative. About 30 years ago, 50 years ago, when boomers were getting involved in the church, it was a social expectation that most people went to church. So that means liberals and conservatives were both going to church. And because the mainline denominations were the liberal ones, if you were a liberal and you wanted to go to some church, you would probably go to a mainline Protestant church. Nowadays, it's not like that. Nowadays, people, except for like boomers, nowadays people don't go to church based on social obligation. The only people in Gen Z who go to church are the people who deeply care about it, the people who deeply care about religion. And I know there's some exceptions, but generally people who deeply care about religion are socially and theologically conservative, especially in Gen Z. So that's why I think we're going to keep seeing the laity of these denominations get more and more conservative. And eventually, the clergy is going to start reflecting that. Eventually. I think in terms of clergy, it might get more liberal before it gets more conservative, but I think the laity is going to progressively and steadily get more conservative. Now, a couple years ago, I started Operation Reconquista to revive and reform these mainline Protestant denominations and bring them back to the beliefs they were founded upon. The reason I think it's necessary, the reason these denominations got so liberal, is because the liberals stayed, but the conservatives just split off. And every time the conservatives split off, it made the mainline churches just more theologically liberal. So our goal is to get the conservatives to rejoin mainline Protestant denominations to help reform them. And the reason why I think the mainline Protestant churches are worth preserving is because, you know, they have all the historic buildings and cultural connections and seminaries and so many resources that were dedicated to God's kingdom over many generations by Christians. I don't think we should let those resources be used by people who don't believe the essentials of Christianity. And the reason I think it's very possible is because even though conservative congregations, like with conservative pastors, are indeed a minority in these churches, they're the only ones that are not rapidly dying out. So eventually, I think it's inevitable the mainline Protestant churches are going to drift more conservative. Now, through this Reconquista movement, there's been specific organizations formed for each denomination. So I co-founded Presbyterians for the Kingdom, which is specific to reviving and reforming our denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA. We promote reformation, revitalization, and reunification. And you can read our mission statement here. We have a map where you can find a faithful PCUSA congregation. Because even though, like I said, the majority of PCUSA congregations are more liberal, there are still hundreds of PCUSA congregations that are either conservative or moderate, meaning conservatives are absolutely welcome. And in the because the mainline is such a big tent, almost no mainline Protestant congregation is ever going to be entirely liberal or conservative. It's always going to be a bit of a mix. And personally, I think Christians need to be better at fellowshipping with people who disagree with them. Like, I am conservative. I'm fine fellowshipping with liberals in my church, especially if they're not denying the essentials of Christianity. I might disagree with them on some moral issues, but it's not my job to correct them. It's the pastor's job. Now, speaking of pastors, I do think we do need a lot more of the laity to get involved in the clergy of these denominations. We need, young conservative Gen Z laity to join the clergy of these mainline Protestant denominations. It's going to be easier than ever to do so because so many of these denominations are desperate for new leadership. They are desperate for clergy. That's why I am in seminary right now. I am attempting to join the clergy of the PCUSA. This is my seminary t-shirt, by the way. I'm a seminarian at University of Dubuque Theological Seminary in Iowa. It's a PCUSA seminary. But yeah, that's why I founded PFTK. PFTK is a very educational focus. We want to especially try and get young seminarians involved in the denomination. So, we are hosting a national conference in 2026, March 2nd to the 3rd in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. And major PCUSA pastors will be speaking at this conference. Reverend Ray Hilton of National Presbyterian Church in Washington, D.C. is going to be speaking at this conference. That's like a very big, important, historic, influential PCUSA church. Several other pastors. My seminary professor, Dr. Richard Burnett, who's an awesome theologian. He's the best. He's also going to be speaking at this conference. So you don't need to be PCUSA to be in this conference. We would ask that you have some interest in being involved in the PCUSA, because otherwise, why are you interested in this? Or if you just want to come to the conference, that's fine. We're going to have some plenary addresses on hope for the PCUSA. HOPE is our acronym that stands for Holiness, Orthodoxy, Perseverance, and Evangelism. Some big-time pastors like Reverend David Kling will be leading our worship. And yeah, this is a acronym to try and inspire people to revive these denominations. The reason we need to be inspired is because, if you read the media headlines about these denominations, it's like, oh, they're so liberal, they're dying out. This shows that there is still a quiet, silent conservative majority in these denominations. We're trying to inspire them to get involved. And I think seeing the numbers should convince you guys that there is hope for these denominations. We just need the laity to get involved. So yeah, all of you guys are invited to the PFTK conference. Once again, even if you're not in the PCUSA, as long as you're interested in reform in the PCUSA, you are invited to this conference. And thank you so much for watching this video. Pray for the mainline Protestant churches. Pray for the Reconquista. Pray for PFTK. And I will see you guys later. God bless.